couple of weeks ago, we published our first initial review of the all-new Leica M11. And subsequent to that video, we have received quite a couple of requests from people asking us to touch on more of the technical aspects pertaining to the new M11. And actually a surprising amount of people asking us to compare it to the M10. With the main question being, if you are currently an M10 owner, is it worth upgrading to the Leica M11? So in this video, we are going to delve into some of the tech specs of the M11 and compare it directly in terms of image quality and image results to the M10. The M11 serves to usher in a new era of Leica imaging quality and technology. And that's a little bit strange. You see, the M series cameras is designed for a photographer that values a more traditional analog shooting experience. A way of shooting that has become a very niche experience. The M series has remained largely unchanged for decades. A clear window to the world through the rangefinder, a vast array of lenses compatible with the system, a compact body, and a set of controls that any photographer can pick up and feel immediately comfortable with. That has always been the M formula. In designing the new Leica M11, Leica wanted to marry a nostalgic and unique shooting experience with a modern and forward-thinking technology set. The question is, have they succeeded? Let's start with the nostalgia. When you pick the M11 up, it feels both familiar and formidable. If you've ever used any other M series camera, whether film or digital, the controls will be instantly familiar to you. In the hand, this thing feels indestructible, and that's on purpose. Leica wants you to feel like you've invested in a camera system, not simply bought a new camera. Every part on this camera that looks like metal is metal. It feels exactly as heavy as it looks. And that's okay, because it conveys a sense of quality and craftsmanship that, if I may be so bold, no one else in the camera industry can compare with. And while we're talking about the weight, it is worth noting that specifically the black M11 is actually significantly lighter than the M10, around 20% lighter. And that is in a large part due to the top plate being replaced by an aluminium plate instead of a brass plate. Is that a good thing? Well, if you want a lighter camera, yes. But the downside, or potential downside, is that we simply don't yet know how this plate is going to wear. If you look at the M10 over here, and I mean, this is not an old camera by any means, there has already formed a lovely patina on all the edges of the camera, and that's simply from hands touching that brass plate. And that is quite an appeal of this M system, that look that you get over time of using it. And only time will tell if the new aluminium plate will render us that same patina. And if it does, then this will be pure advantage. The other major body difference to the M10 is the integration of the bottom plate. Gone is the removable bottom plate, like you see on the M10, revealing your battery and memory card. And this has now been replaced by a complete battery integration. So you flick this little switch, the battery pops out, half a little press, battery is removable, and this also reveals your memory card slot. In addition to this change, the bottom of the camera also contains a USB-C port. This can be used for charging, file transfer, or for smartphone connectivity. Now, is this an improvement over the system used in the M10 and all other predecessors? The simple answer, in my opinion, is yes. It is a significant improvement. This is faster, easier, and arguably a more reliable system than what's found in your M10. And the ease of changing batteries and accessing your memory card really is an advantage in a professional context. If you're using these cameras daily, you will undoubtedly notice the benefit of this. The integration of the USB-C port obviously has its own advantages, and that becomes very, very evident, again, when you use this camera in a professional context. The connectivity that this offers and the speed of file transfer and the speed of connectivity is a massive advantage over the previous M10. Now let's look at the biggest change and probably the reason why most users would consider an upgrade from the M10, that all-new sensor. Now the M10 had a 23 megapixel full-frame sensor. The M11 hits with a 60 megapixel sensor. More megapixels mean a higher resolution image and therefore better image quality. Plain and simple, right? But it goes a little bit deeper than the numbers suggest. Every sensor has to be coupled to an image processor. An image processor takes the information captured by the sensor and transcodes it, processes it into the information that we can see. Now the Leica M11 uses Leica's latest Maestro 3 processing chip, while the M10 used the previous generation Maestro 2 processing chip. This new processor provides better noise reduction, better color accuracy, and increased speed of operation. Now we will touch on the enhanced color accuracy a little bit later on, but for now, let's get back to that 60 megapixels. Now I know at this point there are some users saying, what is the point of 60 megapixels in a manual focus rangefinder camera? 60 megapixels will make it more difficult to get sharp images. You don't need 60 megapixels if you know what you're doing. And I hear you guys. And I tended to agree with you, but my mind has changed after living with the M11. When the technology is built correctly and implemented in the right way, having 60 megapixels is a massive advantage to many professional users. Having that amount of pixels allows for a freedom of cropping and recomposition that the M10 is simply not capable of. You can crop in more interesting ways, and you retain the flexibility of your file even after the fact because you retain that high resolution. If the technology allows for it, the advantage of 60 megapixels is clear. Now let's compare some images from the M11 to those from the M10. Now for this experiment, we're using straight from camera JPEGs with very similar exposure settings on both cameras. Firstly, let's get one thing out of the way. If Leica M delivered subpar or even average images, it would not be the aspirational brand that it is today. And looking at these images, there are differences, some quite subtle and some a lot more obvious. But the thing to remember is that any image can be tweaked and manipulated to get the result that you desire, the result that fits into your workflow. And at the end of the day, what is important when it comes to reviewing images is to find something that natively out of the camera gets you as close as possible to the result that you want with as little manipulation needed. And that's what's important here. Now let's just pop up some of these images here. And let's start with some of the black and white images. Now again, straight from camera JPEG with no in-camera enhancements turned on. So contrast, sharpness, saturation, everything set to the default 0 values. The differences are quite clear, but not that apparent always. The image out of the M10 is definitely, in my opinion, a little bit more punchy, a little bit more contrasty. The blacks within the frame are definitely a little bit darker, and the lighter tones separate really, really well from those darker blacks within the frame. Now contrast that against the image out of the M11, and to my eye, personal opinion, a slightly less pleasing image, but a much more traditional black and white image, a more film-like black and white image. Your graduations are more pronounced, the way that the image transitions from a dark black into a much lighter area of the frame is definitely smoother, and there's more gray tones within that graduation. And that's important because, again, remember that this image is just a starting point. And from this point on, you tweak. And the M11's image will definitely give you more latitude for editing in post than what you are going to get out of the image from the M10. And again, these are just JPEGs. Push this over into the DNG file format, and the difference is even bigger. Now, as I said, to me personally, straight from camera, the image, the black and white image out of the M10 is more pleasing because it pops more. But at the end of the day, that is just my opinion. And when I look at it, I can definitely see the merit in both of these types of output. Now, if we jump over to the color images, this is where the differences between these two systems become glaringly obvious. If you look at these images, you will see that the images from the M10 has a very distinct cast to them. In some images, it's almost a yellowy cast. And then when you look at a specific image where we shot indoors into a sort of a food market area, there it's a very pronounced green cast across almost the entire image. Now, in that area, you had tungsten lighting and you had a significant amount of daylight spill in both from where the photographer is standing, so coming behind, and from the end of the long corridor coming in. And this is where the M10 really starts to show the fact that it is a 5-year-old camera, a 5-year-old design trying to compete against a modern new sensor tech that is contained within the M11. That color cast hints at something very specific. Within the M11, for the first time in a Leica M series digital camera, when you switch the camera on, the shutter opens and remains open. The sensor is permanently exposed to the light entering through the lens. In the M10, that shutter remains closed and only opens once you release said shutter. What does that allow you within the M11? Well, it allows the M11 to function more like other modern mirrorless cameras, where that sensor continuously reads information and the processor continuously processes said information. And that translates to a much more accurate color rendition at the end of the day. Because that sensor is constantly reading, it allows the camera to constantly make adjustments to the white balance, something which the M10 simply cannot do. And when you have the ability to make constant adjustments, you get a more accurate image being delivered. When I say accurate, I mean true to life, as in me standing there viewing the scene with my eyes and the camera reproducing it. The color image coming out of the M11 is 100% accurate to how I perceive those colors. And yes, that might be slightly different for other users depending on your own color interpretation. But to me, for me using this product, the accuracy is a massive jump up from what I have within the M10. In my previous M11 video, I said that I tell my friends that I mostly just shoot black and white because the color coming out of the M10 or previous cameras that I've owned just simply isn't up to par. And that's true. It takes a lot of effort with the M10 to get a truly accurate color tone. And in these images, yes, you will see it related to a scene, but it becomes very pronounced when you're shooting portraits. And color tone in portraits is important. With the M10, you have to do a lot of editing to bring those skin tones back to a natural level. The M11 is exactly as I see it, and it delivers a true to life, for me, image when I'm shooting in color. And that's a massive advantage, no matter how you cut it. So at the start of this video, we said that we wanted to look at some of the key specs within the M11 and then answer the question whether it's worth upgrading from the M10 to the M11. Now, looking at the specs of the M11, I think that that's pretty conclusive. Yes, the specs are better in every possible way. There's no two ways around it. The specifications that you get within the M11 is exactly what Leica set out for it to be. It brings in a very modern technology set into a camera that really has its roots in a history of image making that is unsurpassed by any other manufacturer within this field. And that's important because it means that the M series camera will continue, and it will continue to deliver the image results that people have come to expect, but also the feel and the experience that we've come to know and love. Is it worth upgrading if you currently have an M10? Well, to be honest, when I first received the M11 for testing, I did not think so. I thought that I will stay with the M10. It is everything that I want out of a rangefinder camera. And the M11, as nice as 60 megapixels is, and the fact that the color is a little bit more accurate, well, it's nice, but it's not enough to sway me. But after living with the M11 and using it as my daily camera and shooting it side by side with the M10, my opinion has changed. When I look at it now, the benefits that come with the M11 far outshine anything that the M10 can give me. The one place where I prefer the M10, when you're shooting straight out of camera, JPEG, black and whites, that's not necessarily a benefit to the M10. It is, in fact, a testament to the fact that the sensor is simply not as good. The processor is simply not as good as the ones contained within the M11. And it's easy enough to get the exact same result out of the M11. Up the contrast by 1 or shoot in the higher contrast black and white mode within your JPEG settings, and you're basically there. A little bit of tweaking in Lightroom and you're there again. When you take that out of the equation, you have a camera that is faster, that is probably in the long term more reliable now because of the upgraded technology within it. And you have a camera that is more reliable in the image that it delivers, especially once you start tinkering with the RAW files. The image delivered by the M11 is so robust, so dense, so deep, that the M10 simply cannot compete with it. And that to me is important. How much editing do I have to do when I'm shooting a RAW file? Not shooting a file for my own private use, my own private enjoyment. But if I were a professional photographer and I had to create an image for a client, how much editing do I have to do to go from the image captured to the image that needs to be delivered? And there the M11 stands completely apart. And I dare even say it stands above other contemporary, modern, mirrorless systems. Because the image that I get out of the M11 is so true to life and so near to what I wish to deliver, a color accurate image, that the M11 becomes the easy choice.